The wind howled like a living beast, clawing at the seams of the cabin tucked deep in the Wyoming valley. Snow fell in heavy, wet sheets, covering the world in white silence. Inside, Clara Whitmore sat alone at a rough-hewn table, the wood worn smooth by time and worry. Her fingers clutched a letter, ink faded, creased down the middle from being folded and unfolded too many times. The words inside still burned, no matter how many times she read them. Clara, the final tuition payment is due next week. If I can't pay it, I'll have to come home. I don't want to give up, but I don't want to be a burden either. Love, Emily. Clara stared at the flickering oil lamp, its flames stuttering against the draft. She didn't have the money. Not anymore. Most of the cattle were gone, the soil too frozen to plant, and the bank's patience was running thinner than the gruel on her stove. She had promised their dying father she'd give Emily a better life. But promises didn't pay debts. Then came the knock. It wasn't the wind, it was measured, heavy. The kind of knock that didn't ask, it warned. Clara reached for the old revolver under the table before stepping to the door. She opened it a crack and froze. Standing there, snow dusting his broad shoulders, was James McCade, the man she once loved, the man she had spent the last 7 years hating, the man everyone in town believed had murdered her father. Her throat tightened, fingers curling around the edge of the door. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice flat. James didn't flinch. He met her gaze with those steel-gray eyes that had once felt like home. "I know," he said, "but I came anyway." The snow swirled around him. Behind Clara, the fire hissed in the stove. Her heart beat like a drum inside her chest. "I don't forgive you," she said. "I didn't ask for that." Clara hesitated, torn between slamming the door and falling into his arms. Instead, she said nothing, just closed the door slowly until all that remained of him was the silence he left behind. But silence doesn't last long in a place like Wyoming, especially not when ghosts come knocking. The storm eased by morning, leaving the landscape coated in white silence. Clara stepped outside, boots crunching through the snow, breath curling into the cold air. The sky was a dull slate gray, not quite ready to break, and the mountains in the distance loomed like sleeping giants. The world looked calm, but she knew better. Some storms didn't leave marks you could see. They carved themselves inside a person, quiet, deep, permanent. Back inside, Clara pulled off her gloves, tossed them on the table, and stared at the dying fire. She hadn't slept. James McCade's voice still rang in her ears, low and quiet, like it had never really left. She hated how easily it brought memories rushing back. They'd grown up within shouting distance of each other's land. Her father, Thomas Whitmore, hadn't liked the McCades, said they were trouble, wild-blooded, too quick with a gun and too slow with a conscience. But James had been different, at least to her. He was steady where the others weren't, strong in a quiet way. She'd known him before she even knew what love was, before grief, before hate, before all the lines got drawn in blood. They'd spent their childhood summers beside the creek, chasing dragonflies and skipping rocks. By the time Clara was 16, she knew two things for certain: she'd never leave the valley, and she'd marry James McCade. It was the kind of dream that felt as solid as stone back then. But everything changed the night her father died. It was a late August evening. The sun was still holding on to the edge of the world, casting long shadows across the pastures. Clara had just finished supper when the sheriff arrived, hat in his hands, eyes full of something awful. He said her father had been found dead near the old cedar grove, shot through the chest. The cattle were still there, nothing stolen, no struggle, just one thing left behind, a boot print. And beside it, a spent cartridge, same make James McCade had carried since he was 15. James didn't deny being near the grove that day, but he claimed he'd left long before the shot was fired, said he was hunting rabbits, said he didn't even know Mr. Whitmore had been there. But no one believed him. Not the sheriff, not the neighbors, and worst of all, not Clara. The day after the funeral, James disappeared. No note, no explanation, just vanished like smoke. Clara buried her love beside her father that week, and she never looked back. The years that followed were the kind that didn't pass so much as drag. Clara took over the land, though it barely held together. The soil was stubborn, the winters cruel, and the bank never stopped knocking. Most folks in town stopped looking her in the eye. She figured it was easier for them not to think too hard about what had happened. It was cleaner that way, simpler. She sold off the better cattle first, then the older tools. By the time her younger sister Emily left for school back east, there was little left but the land and Clara's promise. That promise, that Emily would never have to come back here, that she would have a future carved from something other than dirt and sorrow. That was the only thing Clara had left worth fighting for. Clara didn't speak much anymore, not to the townsfolk, not to God. But sometimes, in the quiet just before dawn, she'd catch herself whispering to her father's grave, as if the soil could still hear her, as if it could answer. "I'm doing what I can," she'd say, "but it's getting harder," and harder it was. That winter came early, biting and bitter. The feed ran low. The bank sent another letter. Clara didn't open it right away. What would be the point? Then came James. She hadn't seen him in 7 years, and yet when she opened that door and found him standing in the snow, it was like the world skipped a beat, like it didn't know whether to fall apart or knit itself back together. He looked different, older, of course. The boyish grin was gone, replaced by something heavier, worn down at the edges. There was a scar on his jaw she didn't remember, and his eyes didn't move as fast as they used to. But when he said her name, just once, she almost forgot how to breathe. Clara told herself she didn't feel anything. Not hate, not longing, just surprise. But that was a lie, because underneath all the years, all the silence and bitterness, there was something else, something alive. Still, she had sent him away. He didn't fight her on it, just gave her that look, half apology, half something else. And then he left, vanishing into the storm the same way he'd vanished all those years ago. Clara had leaned against the door after it closed, her breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. She told herself it meant nothing, that ghosts sometimes wore the faces of the living, but ghosts didn't knock, and they sure as hell didn't come back twice. That night, Clara didn't light the fire. She sat by the stove anyway, wrapped in her father's old coat, the silence stretching thin around her like glass about to crack. The letter from Emily lay open again on the table, the ink smudged from where Clara's thumb had pressed too hard. She read the line over and over. "I don't want to be a burden, but I don't know what else to do." Emily didn't know the truth, didn't know the cattle were almost gone, that the bank had stopped sending polite letters and started preparing papers, that Clara had sold her mother's locket to cover the last shipment of feed. She didn't know because Clara had never told her. She couldn't. What would be the point in carrying the weight of someone else's worry? Clara looked around the cabin, at the patched walls, the cracked window pane, the chair with the broken leg she never had time to fix. It wasn't a home anymore, just a shell. And she was starting to feel like one too. The knock from James had stirred something she didn't want to name, something like hope or pain, or maybe the dangerous place between them. She remembered how it used to be, not just the summer days running barefoot through the wild grass, but the quiet nights too, when they'd meet at the fence line and talk until the stars blinked awake. James had always listened. He never tried to fix her, never made promises he couldn't keep. He just stood there, steady as a stone, and made the world feel less heavy for a little while, until the night her father died. Clara had never asked questions, not really. The cartridge left behind had been enough. The boot print, the gossip, the silence that followed. She told herself she didn't need more. The pain of betrayal had been cleaner that way, sharper, easier to hold than the blur of uncertainty. But now, she wasn't sure. James had looked her in the eye. He hadn't begged. He hadn't denied. He had simply said, "I didn't come for forgiveness." And that, more than anything, had rattled her, because it meant maybe he wasn't guilty. And if he wasn't guilty, then Clara had spent 7 years hating the wrong man. Building a life on a lie she had never bothered to question. The wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. Clara rose slowly and crossed to the door. She didn't open it this time, just stood there, listening, not for ghosts, but for the truth. 2 days passed, the storm broke, the clouds scattered, and sunlight poured over the valley like something half forgotten. Clara hitched up the wagon and rode into town not because she wanted to, but because she had to. The pantry was down to cracked cornmeal and regret, and Mr. Barrow kept the only flour that didn't come with weevils baked in. Dry Creek had never been much to look at, just a single main street lined with crooked buildings, hitching rails, and tired eyes. Clara never stayed long when she came. She got what she needed and left before the whispers had a chance to catch up. But today, the whispers met her at the door. The bell over Barrow's general store jingled as she stepped inside. Old Hank Drummond looked up from the potbelly stove, pipe clenched between his teeth. "You hear McCade's back?" He muttered around the stem, not even pretending discretion. Clara didn't flinch. She walked straight to the shelves and reached for a sack of beans. Jed Harmon snorted from behind the counter. "Saw him out near Cedar Creek, plain as day. You'd think a man with a price on his name would keep to the shadows." "Wasn't never convicted," Hank said. Jed shrugged. "Don't take a noose to prove guilt." Clara turned slowly, placing the beans on the counter with a soft thump. "You two always talk this much about men who ain't here to defend themselves?" Hank leaned back, unbothered, just passing the time. She stared at him, unmoving, then passed it quieter. Jed glanced away, busying himself with the tally sheet. "Anything else, Miss Whitmore? Flour, coffee, and a bottle of kerosene if it's still cheap." Neither man spoke as Jed packed the supplies. Clara counted out her coins, jaw tight. She knew what they thought, what everyone thought. That James McCade was trouble, that he had blood on his hands, that she was a fool for ever letting him get close. She told herself it didn't matter. She didn't need their approval. She just needed their goods. But as she stepped back out into the sunlight, the wind cut sharper than before. She wasn't 10 paces down the boardwalk when she saw him, leaning against the post outside the smithy, coat unbuttoned, hair windblown, hat low over his eyes. James McCade. He saw her at the same moment, straightened up slow, like he'd been waiting. Clara stopped walking. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then James tipped his hat. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, voice easy, like they hadn't been strangers for half a lifetime. Clara's hand tightened on the parcel in her arms. "It's my town, too. Never said it wasn't." A horse stomped behind them. Somewhere a hammer rang out on iron. James glanced at her carefully. "You look the same?" Clara tilted her chin. "You don't." A pause. Then, almost gently, he said, "I'm not." Clara stared at him, her eyes unreadable, but her heart pounded like hooves against hard earth. He hadn't changed in the ways that mattered. Not the way he looked at her, not the quiet in his voice when he spoke her name. "What are you doing here, James?" she asked, not bothering to soften it. "Thought maybe I'd see if you needed anything." "I need a lot of things," she replied. "None of them come from you." He absorbed the words like he always had, without flinching, without folding. He just nodded slowly and said, "Fair enough." Clara turned to go, but then she heard his boots crunch in the dirt behind her. "I heard about Emily," he said quietly. Clara froze. James continued, cautious. "About her schooling, that she might have to come home." Her spine stiffened. "That's none of your concern. It is if you're killing yourself trying to keep her there." She spun on him, eyes flashing. "Don't you dare pretend to know what I'm doing. You gave up the right to ask questions the night you disappeared." His jaw tensed. "That wasn't my choice. You could have stayed. You could have fought." "I did fight, Clara. You just weren't looking." That hit like a slap she hadn't braced for. She swallowed hard and looked away, back toward the wagon. "You left me," she said, voice low. "Right after he died. You didn't even say goodbye. I didn't think you wanted to hear it." "You were right." The space between them pulsed, thick with memories neither of them had wanted to carry. The way he used to bring her wildflowers, how he always walked her home, even when she insisted she didn't need it. The night by the creek when his fingers brushed hers and the world had gone silent, except for the sound of their breath. "I don't expect you to believe me," James said after a long pause. "Not after all this time. But I didn't kill your father." Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And I suppose you're just here to clear your name?" "No," he said simply. "I'm here because I never stopped caring what happened to you." Her throat tightened. James took a slow step forward, stopping short of touching her. "You've been carrying this weight for too long," he said. "Let me help." She shook her head. "I don't need your help, I know. But maybe you deserve it anyway." The words sat heavy between them, and for just a moment something flickered in Clara's eyes. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but doubt. And that was dangerous enough. The wind had changed by the time Clara returned home, pushing down from the north in long freezing gusts that rattled the windows and clawed at the shutters. She set her parcels down, lit the lantern, and stood by the fire without lighting it. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She told herself it was the cold, but it wasn't. She could still hear James's voice, soft, steady, unshaken. "I didn't kill your father." She didn't believe him. She couldn't, because if she did, it would unravel everything. Every reason she'd told herself for surviving, for standing tall, for locking her heart behind grief and grit. The wind moaned through the cracks in the walls like an old ghost, and Clara dropped into the chair by the table, exhausted. That was when she heard the knock, again. But this time it wasn't James. Standing on her porch, swaying slightly with a crooked grin, was Jed Harmon. "Evenin', Miss Whitmore," he drawled, his breath trailing whiskey and smoke. "Didn't mean to bother. Just figured you might be interested in a little opportunity." She didn't open the door wide, just enough to let her voice through. "I'm not interested." Jed smirked. "Don't even know what it is yet. I don't care." He leaned closer. "It's about Elias Crowley." That name stopped her cold. Jed saw it, smiled wider. "That's right," he said. "Word is Crowley's holed up in Charcoal Cave. Took a bullet in the leg after a job went sideways. He's paying good money to anyone with steady hands and a strong stomach. Needs patching up, and he don't trust just anyone to do it." Clara didn't move. Jed raised an eyebrow. "Could be just what you need. Some easy coin, or you patch him up, he gives you a sack of cash, you never see him again. No one has to know." She tightened her grip on the doorframe. "You're assuming I'd help a man like Crowley." Jed shrugged. "You helped worse, or thought you did. That cut deep." She didn't let it show. "I'm not that desperate." Jed's smirk turned sour. "Sure about that? Thought I heard something about a tuition payment due. Or maybe that was just gossip." Clara shut the door in his face, but the words stuck. She leaned her forehead against the wood, fists clenched. "Crowley!" A name tied to everything that reeked of blood and fear. A name whispered around saloon corners. A name her father used to spit like poison. And now, that name came with a price that might keep Emily from losing everything. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and weighed sin against survival, and wondered for the first time if they were really different things at all. By morning, the wind had calmed, but Clara's mind hadn't. She saddled her horse in silence, not because she had a plan, but because staying still felt worse than moving toward danger. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge when she rode east, the snow crunching beneath her boots like bones. The road to Charcoal Cave was barely a path, just a suggestion between drifts and frostbitten brush. She wasn't sure why she went that way first. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was dread. But when she reached the fork in the trail, one branch leading toward the cave, the other toward the McCade homestead, her hands tugged the reins without thought. She found James chopping wood near his cabin. The axe rose and fell with a rhythm that hadn't changed since they were young. There was something calming in it. Familiar, too familiar. He looked up before she spoke. "Didn't expect you," he said, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. "I didn't expect to come." He tilted his head. "What changed?" Clara hesitated. "Jed Harmon showed up last night. Said Elias Crowley's hiding in the caves. Hurt, offering money." James's face didn't change, but the stillness in him sharpened. "And you're thinking about taking it?" "I'm thinking," she replied. "That's all." He rested the axe against the stump, breathing slow. "You know what kind of man Crowley is. I know what kind of debt I'm drowning in." James stepped closer. "There are better ways. Name one. Let me help." "No." The word shot out sharper than she meant, and James flinched. Not visibly, not in a way most would notice. But Clara saw it, felt it. "You can't just show up after 7 years and offer to fix my life," she said. "I'm not trying to fix it." "Then what are you doing, James?" His silence answered for him. "You think I'm not still angry?" she said, voice rising. "That I don't wake up every day with the image of my father's body in my head? That I don't remember the boot print and the casing and the fact that you ran?" "I didn't run," he said quietly. "I was pushed. You had a choice. And you made yours." The snow crackled between them. Clara took a breath. "He said he didn't do it." James nodded. "And you believed him." She didn't answer. "I came back because the truth's not finished with either of us," he said. "And neither is Crowley." Clara's throat went dry. "What do you mean?" "I mean," James said, voice heavy, "Crowley's name showed up before your father died. In letters, in warnings your father never told you about. I tried to tell the sheriff. Tried to tell you." She blinked. "Why didn't you say that before?" "Because you didn't want to hear it." He stepped back. "But maybe now you do." Clara stood there, stunned. The weight of everything, Emily, the debt, the past, settled heavier on her shoulders. For the first time in years, doubt carved through the certainty she'd worn like armor. Maybe it hadn't just been grief. Maybe it had also been fear. And fear, she realized, was a poor judge of truth. That evening, Clara stood at the threshold of her cabin, lantern in hand, watching as the sun bled into the horizon. The light turned the snow to fire, glowing gold and red like something holy or something burning. She had told James she wouldn't take the deal. But now she wasn't sure that had been a decision, or just another way of delaying the inevitable. Inside, the letter from Emily lay folded on the table beside her father's old pocket knife. The handwriting was tidy, hopeful, desperate. "I'm so close, Clara. One more semester. I promise I'll make it count." Clara pressed her hand to her stomach, trying to still the churning inside. She'd been strong for so long, holding everything together with calloused palms and silence. But strength didn't keep the roof from sagging, didn't stop the land from freezing, didn't pay tuition. And Elias Crowley, monster that he was, had money. The kind that changed everything. She left before dawn. The trail to Charcoal Cave wound through black pine and wind-carved stone. Her horse balked at the narrow pass but pushed on when she whispered his name and leaned low against his neck. The snow here was deeper, untouched. No tracks but hers. No one sane came this way. That thought alone should have turned her around. It didn't. By mid-morning, she saw smoke curling faintly through the tree line, barely more than a whisper in the air. She dismounted, tied the reins to a sapling, and pulled the old revolver from her saddlebag. Just in case, the cave entrance loomed dark and jagged, tucked beneath a lip of rock. From a distance, it looked like the mouth of a beast, waiting. She moved slowly, boots crunching against ice, heart hammering. Closer now, she could hear voices, low, sharp. Two of them. Men. She edged around a boulder and caught sight of them, one pacing, muttering curses under his breath, the other leaning against the stone wall, rifle across his knees. She held her breath, then stepped on a branch. Crack. The sound shattered the stillness like gunfire. "Who's there?" the pacing man snapped, turning fast. Clara ducked low behind the rock, hand on her revolver, every muscle locked. The other man rose, squinting into the trees. Probably just an animal. Didn't sound like no animal. He lifted the rifle. Clara clenched her teeth, her fingers tightened on the grip. But then, a gust of wind surged through the trees, kicking up snow and dead leaves. Branches swayed. A rabbit darted out from the underbrush, sprinting toward the ridge. "There," the rifleman muttered. "See?" The pacing man cursed again but lowered his gun. "Get back inside," he growled. "Crowley's waiting." Clara waited until their voices faded into the dark mouth of the cave. Only then did she move, slow, silent, slipping in behind them. Or she didn't know exactly what she'd say, didn't know what she'd do, but whatever happened next, it would change everything. The cave swallowed her whole. Inside, the air was damp and close, thick with the smell of smoke, sweat, and something metallic, blood most likely. The flickering fire near the back cast wild shadows across the stone walls, making every crack and ridge look like a scar. Clara kept low, close to the wall, her fingers skimming the rough rock. The guards were farther in now, distracted, voices echoing toward the deeper chamber. She rounded the bend, and there he was. Elias Crowley. He sat slumped against a pile of bundled canvas and saddle blankets, a battered hat pulled low over his brow. His right leg was stiff, wrapped in what looked like a blood-soaked bandage. One arm cradled his side, but his eyes, sharp, glinting like broken glass in firelight, met hers the second she stepped into view. "Well, I'll be damned," he rasped, voice dry and cracked. "If it ain't Thomas Whitmore's little girl." Clara didn't flinch. Crowley's mouth curled into something between a sneer and a smile. "Didn't expect you to come. Figured pride might get in the way. Guess desperation's louder, huh?" Clara's hand hovered near her revolver. "Don't flatter yourself. I'm here for the money." "Of course you are." He coughed, then winced, his hand pressing tighter to his side. "Ain't that why everyone comes crawling in the end?" She said nothing. Crowley nodded toward the saddlebag beside him. "There's your payment, take it. Or stitch me up first if you want to earn it proper. Makes no difference to me." Clara didn't move. "You want me dead, don't you?" he said, smirking. "I can see it in your eyes. You look just like your old man before I shot him." The world stopped. Clara's breath caught. Her blood went cold. Crowley's smirk widened. "What, you didn't know? Thought it was that boy you were sweet on? What was his name? McCade? No, girl, he didn't kill your pa. The cave spun. The walls pressed in. I did." He said it so casually, like he was naming a horse he'd put down. Clara stared at him, every fiber in her body screaming, every bone frozen in place. "She whispered. Crowley gave a lazy shrug. Man owed me, got in the way, acted like a hero. He chuckled, then winced again, breath hitching from the pain. Didn't plan on it, just happened. Clara's hand moved without thought. The revolver came up, her knuckles white around the grip. Crowley didn't blink. Go ahead, he said. Won't be the first time you Whitmores tried to play righteous. The fire crackled. The metal felt hot in her hand. Her father's face flickered in her memory. Stern, proud, soft only when he looked at Emily. Gone in an instant. Blamed on the wrong man. Because of him, Elias Crowley. The devil she'd been taught to fear, and the man who had made her hate the one person who never deserved it. Clara's finger hovered on the trigger. For a moment there was nothing. No breath, no fire, no sound. Just the weight of that confession filling every corner of the cave like smoke. Her arm trembled, not from weakness but fury. It surged through her chest like a flood, hot and blistering, begging for release. Elias Crowley watched her with calm amusement. Maybe he thought she wouldn't do it. Maybe he didn't care. He looked like a man who'd already seen the worst of the world and didn't expect better from the end. I should kill you, she said, her voice shaking with rage. Right here, no law, no jury, just truth and consequence. Crowley's lips parted, half a grin, half a sneer. Then do it. Clara stepped forward, the gun pressed closer, inches from his heart. But then she stopped, because behind his smirk, she saw something that startled her. Fear, real fear. Not the kind men wore like armor, not the false bravado he'd greeted her with, but the kind that lived behind the eyes when death was no longer a theory, and somehow it wasn't enough. She lowered the gun. Crowley's brows twitched, confused. What, now you're merciful? No, she whispered. I'm not. She stepped back and kicked the leather pouch of money into the fire. It hit with a soft thud, then burst into flame. The bills curled and blackened, eaten alive by orange and blue heat. Crowley lunged with a snarl, but his wounded leg gave out beneath him. He collapsed, groaning, scrambling forward like a snake with no spine. You stupid girl! Clara stared down at him, voice hollow. You stole everything from me, my father, my trust, my future, and you want me to take your money to fix it? She shook her head. I'd rather starve, the fire roared. Crowley cursed, slamming his fist against the ground. That was your chance! No, she said. This is. And with that, she turned and walked away, her back to him, to the past, to everything she'd buried and everything she now chose to carry. She didn't look back. Outside, the air hit her like a slap, cold, clean, bracing. Clara stood in the snow, breathless, her heartbeat drumming against her ribs. The sky had opened above the pines. The storm had passed. She was alive. And so was the truth. She mounted her horse with numb hands and rode hard, not toward home, but toward Dry Creek, toward James, because there were words that needed to be said, wounds that needed to be reopened, to be cleaned, and she was done letting silence speak for her. As the wind raced through her hair and the mountains watched in still silence, Clara Whitmore rode with fire behind her and something like freedom just ahead. Dry Creek lay quiet under the pale light of late afternoon. The snowbanks piled high along the sides of the road, melting in slow, reluctant drips. Clara rode fast and hard through the edge of town, ignoring the few glances cast her way. Faces turned in windows, curtains twitched. But she didn't stop. She knew where James would be. The ridge above the pasture still held the same crooked tree they used to sit under as children. From there you could see the whole valley, whitewashed and wind-blown, the sky stretched wide above it all. Clara pushed her horse hard up the slope, heart pounding louder than the hoofbeats beneath her. He was there, standing beside his horse, cinching the saddle straps, ready to ride. Maybe he was leaving for good this time. She called his name before she could lose her nerve. James! He turned. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she leapt from the saddle and half ran, half stumbled toward him. His face was unreadable, calm as always, but his eyes flicked over her like he already knew something had changed. Clara stopped a few paces away, her breath fogged between them. I went to the cave, she said. James didn't speak. She swallowed hard. Crowley's there, hurt bad. Guards posted outside. He didn't think I'd come. What did he say? Her voice cracked. He said, he killed my father. James blinked once. Slowly, his jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. I had a gun pointed at him, she whispered. I almost pulled the trigger, but you didn't. I burned the money instead. James looked at her for a long time, and then finally he nodded. I'm sorry, Clara said, voice trembling. I believed what they said about you. I believed it because it was easier than not knowing. Because if I'd asked the hard questions, I would have had to admit I didn't know the man I loved. James's expression shifted, just slightly. Enough. She took a step closer. I was wrong, she said. About you. About everything. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was still. Waiting, James lowered his head, hands braced on his belt. You weren't the only one who lost something that day. Clara felt her throat tighten. I know. You broke something in me, Clara, when you turned away. Tears stung the corners of her eyes, but she didn't look away. Then let me help mend it. For a moment he stood there, unmoving. Then, without a word, he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. The wind whispered through the grass, snow melted around their boots. The sky cracked open, and light spilled through. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully. But it was a beginning. They didn't speak much on the ride back. Words felt too small, too fragile, for the kind of weight they both carried. But Clara didn't need conversation. Not now. Not with James riding beside her again, steady and quiet, as if the silence between them had never grown into a chasm. Back at the cabin, the air was colder, the light fading into soft blue shadows across the snow. Clara lit the stove, while James stabled the horses. She moved through the kitchen with muscle memory, her hands finding matches and pots and dried beans as if no time had passed. But something had changed. Not in what she did, but in what she felt while doing it. James returned, brushing snow from his coat, and paused in the doorway like he didn't quite belong. Clara looked up. You hungry? His brow lifted slightly. Always. She gave a faint smile. Good. Sit. He did. And for the first time in 7 years they shared a meal without tension, thickening the air between them. They didn't speak of the past. They didn't need to. It hung there, acknowledged but unspoken. Like a scar both of them knew by touch, even if they never traced the edges again. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the fire crackled warm in the hearth, Clara poured 2 mugs of coffee and joined him at the table again. I sent a letter to Emily, she said. James looked up, told her she could stay in school, that things were looking up. His gaze softened. You tell her why? No, Clara said, wrapping her hands around the mug. Some truths are meant for later, some never. James nodded slowly. She'll be proud of you. Clara looked toward the window, where snow fell in lazy flakes now, no longer a threat. Just part of the land. I'm not sure I did the right thing walking away from Crowley, letting him live. James's voice was low. You didn't let him live, Clara, you let yourself live. She closed her eyes for a moment, let the words settle, then she said, barely audible, would you have done it? Pulled the trigger? James didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet but certain. I've spent most of my life trying not to be the kind of man who solves things with a gun. Clara opened her eyes and looked at him. And have you succeeded? He held her gaze. I'm still trying. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the wind howled through the pine, but inside the cabin it was warm, steady. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. It was rough and scarred, like hers. Like both of them, there were no promises made, no declarations, just hands held, coffee shared, silence honored. Healing, she realized, didn't arrive with a loud reckoning. It crept in gently, like snow melt, quiet, but unstoppable. Spring came slow to the valley that year. The snow melted in stubborn patches, revealing the bruised ground beneath. Streams cracked open, their frozen skin giving way to cold, clear water that ran like veins through the hills. The cabin remained, weathered but standing, like the woman inside it. Clara stepped onto the porch, a mug of coffee in her hand, steam curling into the morning air. She wore her father's coat still, patched now, sleeves rolled, and her hair tied back with a strip of faded gingham. She looked down at the patch of soil by the steps, where snow had finally surrendered. And there, breaking through the thawed earth, was something green, small, delicate, a sapling. She hadn't planted it. It had found its way there on its own, carried by wind or bird or luck. But it had chosen that spot, the hardest ground, the place the drifts buried deepest all winter. And still it had risen. James stepped out behind her, quiet as ever. He looked at the sapling, then at her. You see it? Clara nodded. I don't know what kind it is yet. Does it matter? No, she said, watching the way the leaves curled toward the light. Just matters that it's here. They stood in silence, the kind shared by people who no longer feared quiet. Inside, a letter sat on the table. Emily's latest. Full of joy, of exams passed, of plans made. She had no idea how close it had all come to falling apart. Clara didn't mind. Some burdens were worth carrying if it meant someone else got to run free. She turned to James. "You staying?" He didn't answer right away, but he didn't look away either. "Long as you want me to," he said. Clara held his gaze. "And if I don't say anything?" He smiled faintly. "Then I'll keep building the fence and splitting the wood until you do." A breeze moved through the pines. Birds called from somewhere higher up the ridge. Life, slow but steady, had returned to the valley. James stepped off the porch, crouched beside the sapling, and gently cleared a bit of dead brush from its base. His hands, usually so sure, moved with care. Clara watched him for a long moment. Then she stepped down beside him. Together, without ceremony, they began piling stones in a small circle around the roots. Not a wall, not a barrier. Just something to say, "This matters." The morning sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the cabin and the land it guarded. In the distance, the world still held its rough edges, still whispered of danger, of hunger, of old ghosts and older wounds. But here, something new had taken root, and it was growing. By the end of the week, the first shoots of wildflowers began to dot the edge of the fence line, yellow, violet, and pale blue, like someone had spilled a painter's water glass across the hills. Clara knelt near them one morning, her hands buried in the dirt, sleeves rolled, face smudged with soil and light. She didn't speak, she just worked. James watched from the porch, arms crossed loosely over his chest, boots propped on the top step. He wasn't used to stillness, not after years of moving, hiding, surviving. But here, in this place with her, stillness didn't feel like prison. It felt like choice. Sometimes healing wasn't about fixing what was broken. Sometimes it was about planting something new beside the ruins. They rebuilt the barn first, together. He hammered, she braced. They argued about beams, laughed over nails, and spent long hours without saying anything at all. At night they ate by the fire, the cabin quieter now, but not empty. Never empty. The townsfolk had noticed James hadn't left. They whispered, as townsfolk do. But none dared confront Clara about it, not after what she'd done, facing down Crowley, riding through the storm, standing tall where most would have folded. Rumors shifted, stories changed, and somewhere in between fact and fiction, a new reputation took root. Not for James, for Clara. They called her the woman who walked into the devil's mouth and came out clean. She never corrected them. The truth, after all, was a heavy thing. Not everything needed to be shared to be real. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long, Clara walked out to her father's grave. The grass had come in greener this year. The headstone was clean. At its base, she placed a small wooden box. Inside it, the last cartridge from her revolver, the corner of a burned banknote, and a folded piece of paper, Emily's latest letter. She sat cross-legged in the dirt and whispered, "I know you tried to protect us," she said. "I didn't understand it then, but I do now." She paused. "And I think you'd like him. He's still stubborn, still slow to speak, but he never once walked away from the hard thing." The breeze moved through the grass like breath. Clara stood and brushed off her skirt. Her hand lingered on the headstone. "Rest easy, Pa. I got it from here." She turned and walked back toward the cabin. James was waiting on the porch, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. The sapling near the steps had grown an inch. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Some wounds scar, some fade, and some become roots. Beneath the mountains, under the open sky, 2 people, both broken once, both blamed once, had built something again. Not perfect, but real. Something worth staying for, something worth growing. Some stories don't end with justice in a courtroom or vengeance drawn in blood. Some end in smaller ways, in saplings pushing through frostbitten ground, in letters written with steady hands, in the quiet between 2 people, learning how to live without the weight of old wounds pressing down on their every breath. Clara Whitmore didn't get her father back. She didn't erase the years of anger or the hollow places where grief had made a home in her chest, but she chose truth over pride. She let go of hate before it hollowed her out for good, and maybe that, in the end, was braver than pulling a trigger. James McCade never needed to be forgiven to stay. He just needed a place where someone believed he was more than the lies said about him. Together, they didn't fix what had been broken, but they built something new beside it, not because it was easy, but because it was right. So now we ask you, would you have burned the money? Would you have believed the man everyone said was a killer? Would you have risked everything? For love, for family, for truth? like Clara did, let us know in the comments. And if this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that sometimes forgiveness is the hardest kind of strength, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Because here, we believe in stories that dig deep, that hurt, that heal, that leave something growing behind, even after the fire. Until next time, keep choosing truth. And remember, some roots grow stronger after the burn,